Good morning, everybody. It's Friday, the 22nd of May, and it's about 7 o'clock in the morning, I think. A wee bit later today, I had a little bit of a lie in. When I do these devotions, as I said last week, I'm trying to share what's been going on with me over the week, maybe some of the conversations I've had, but I made one or two notes this morning because I did realise that last week maybe rambled on a wee bit and wasn't the most coherent of chats. But sometimes our life isn't very coherent, and sometimes as we think through things, as we walk through things, as we talk ourselves through things, it is in that we begin to find sense and we begin to find some stability. So obviously this is a big week. The First Minister announced yesterday that some restrictions will be lifting, and in the hospital there's been a lot happening over the last couple of weeks because we were beginning to anticipate that some of this might happen, and looking at how we try to get the hospital working more like normal. And ironically, it's probably been more stressful than we had to kind of make the hospital change to become like a big massive intensive care unit, because we're now trying to unwrap everything and put it back in its right place, and that's proving more of a challenge. And so it's interesting that when other people might be feeling slight hope or slight relief about the restrictions, and I certainly am from a personal level and when I think about my family, but it's interesting at that time that work is becoming more stressful because there's almost more planning now to try and start putting things together in a safe way while we're still thinking about how we work with coronavirus. I suppose a similar situation to what they're talking about in schools, that schools will be a bit like this and a bit like that, and it's a wee bit like that with the hospitals. But that's just where I've been personally, and it's made me think. I've had two or three very, very just totally encouraging conversations over this week, from people that I hold very dear. The first from my dad, the other is one of my best friends, and I just want to share a wee bit about some of the things that they said, because as I had talked about last week, we can choose where we are planted and we can choose how we meditate, and that helps us to gain perspective on the situations that we're going through. And I've been spending a lot of time in the Book of Job, and I've just been so blessed with the richness in the Book of Job, and just the honesty and the faith and the emotions and the full spectrum of humanity that appears in the Book of Job, and this man who finds himself in very, very difficult circumstances. But I just want to start with this one thought that one of the previous elders at Riverside in Ayr had said this a long time ago. He said, human beings can cope with almost anything apart from uncertainty. And the more I have thought about that, the more I have seen that is a very profound statement, because we are creatures that can set our faces and our focus towards something if we know what needs to be achieved, if we know what the end goal is. But if it's uncertain, if we don't know what's going on, that is what creates the anxiety and maybe the worry that we feel. And so if you think about this, as I share these stories, that we can cope with anything but uncertainty. So, I mean, some of you will know, people from my home group, that Dad was going through radiotherapy. He finished nearly 3 weeks ago, but he was going through his radiotherapy for the 4 weeks, almost at the absolute peak of the COVID crisis, when the ICUs were very busy, when the numbers were very high. And obviously he didn't really have a choice. That is just when it had to happen. And he had been writing a devotion for his own church. And this, he had said that one of the ironic things was that on the face of it, it was the worst time to have radiotherapy. But practically, it was the best time, because he could drive up and there was no trouble with the cars. He could get parked because there was no trouble getting parked. And for the whole 4 weeks of his radiotherapy, he was able to leave the house at a specific time, drive up, have his radiotherapy and drive back. And the actual stress of the process, in terms of the emotional stress of driving up and getting parked and all the rest of it, was much reduced. And so while there would be all sorts of reasons to not have radiotherapy in the middle of a coronavirus crisis, for Dad, the practicalities of it made it the best time. And so there was this sense that even in something like that, God knew what he was doing. God's timing was right. So another story, the week before this all broke, and I had actually decided to step down from my leadership position at the hospital, and the role I had was coming to an end that week, the week before coronavirus, which was quite ironic. And I was driving into work, and I don't remember being distracted. I was just doing my normal thing, and I checked. I was pulling out of a junction, and I checked the road left and right, and I pulled out, and out of nowhere there was a minibus coming, and it was going to, it was going to hit the side of the car, and I put on my brakes and he put on his brakes, and he went right in front of me, and we did have a crash, but the only damage to my car or his car was that my number plate was caught and came off, and what is a number plate? About 5mm. So the only thing that happened was my number plate came off. Now, if that had been, 5 centimetres the other way, I don't know what would have happened. If it had been a metre the other way, he would have been ploughing into the compartment at 50, 60 miles an hour. And again, you say, okay, well, and I remember driving to work that day thinking, yeah, the Lord does hold us in his hand. The Lord does watch over us. So another story. So one of my best friends, he's a really, really clever chap. He's a surgeon, and he has had an amazing training career. He went and worked in some of the best hospitals in the world. He had papers published. He had, he got scientific awards. He was trained to a very high level in a specific type of cancer surgery. He's a Christian, a really, really godly guy. And at the end of it all, the consultant job he got was nothing to do with all that training. And I remember when we spoke about this like 4 years ago, I was more angry than him that this had happened. There had been an opportunity where he had landed, but there was almost a sense of unfairness that he hadn't got the job he should have got. And so he ended up working in a much smaller hospital, and none of it really seemed to make sense. But he has, he has worked away faithfully. He has honoured God in that. And then he was contacted by one of the best hospitals in the world, to say that, that they would like to meet with him to discuss with him coming to work with them. And when he was telling me, I was just so happy. And I said to him, I suppose like the film Chariots of Fire, I said, I always felt in my heart that God would honour you. And one of his other friends had said to him, when he told him, he said, this is amazing, because this was God's trajectory for your life. And he had been speaking to a Christian that he knows within this hospital that he's been invited to work. And the first thing that person said was, well, isn't God's timing just perfect? And this was obviously the time for God to send you here. And I suppose in those three stories, and when you think about what we have spoken about in these devotions, whether it be being caught in the storm, the things that we focus on, working from a place of rest, or choosing where we are planted and choosing where we are rooted. A lot of that has been my way of working through some of the uncertainty of the situation that I find myself in, some of the uncertainties around Corona, some of the fears and concerns we have about each other, about church, about family, about it could be financial security, health security, all these things that are causing all these things to rumble on. And there's probably all these things that are uncertain. And yet, time and again in the Bible, and time and again in our lives, and time and again in the lives of others, we see that God's timing, when we look back, is right, and it's good, and he knows what he's doing. And so I just want to read a couple of passages from Job. And one of the things, and I would encourage you to read Job, because when Job speaks, it's like an emotional roller coaster. So there's anger, there's lament, there's sadness. But every so often, in the depths of these despair, there are these verses that come out that are just rock solid. And it's a really interesting thing. So you're sort of reading it and you're saying, well, this guy's he's not doing well. And then he will say something like this. He will say, but as for me, I know that my Redeemer lives, and he will stand upon the earth at last. And after my body has decayed, yet in my body I will see God. I will see him for myself. Yes, I will see him with my own eyes. I am overwhelmed at the thought. And another part, and these are verses that have been so important to me over the last 8 years. These are like an anchor. They're like a foundation that just, when I am feeling unsteady, I just go back to these again and again and again. And it's these words, and Job says this, but he knows where I am going. And when he tests me, I will come out as pure as gold. For I have stayed in God's paths, I have followed his ways and not turned aside. I have not departed from his commands, but have treasured his words more than daily food. But once he has made his decision, who can change his mind? Whatever he wants to do, he does. See, he will do to me whatever he has planned. He controls my destiny. Now, when I first read those words, I found them very difficult. And it's quite interesting because Job says, just after that, he says, no wonder I am terrified in his presence. When I think of it, terror grips me. Because Job is aware that God can do what he wants. And Job is sure that he's kept God's commandments. I'm less sure that I've kept all of God's commandments. But I would affirm that God knows where I am going. And I would affirm that I will be refined and I will come out as pure gold. And if you think about the vine analogy, the vine will be trained and it will bear fruit. And in this bit when he says, he will do whatever he has planned. And you'll know in another place, God says, I know the plans I have for you. He controls my destiny. Now, if you remember what we said at the start, we said we can cope with everything apart from uncertainty. And the Christian has the strongest certainty there is. We have the absolute authority of the one who made the universe and knows everything that is going to happen, telling us again and again in his word that our hope and our future is certain. The path to that is not certain, in the sense that there will be ups and downs and there will be difficulties. But the end point is assured. Another thing is, I suppose when I read stuff like that, I think, right, okay, how do I rest in God's sovereignty, but not err towards, well, what does it matter what I do, towards a fatalism where you just sort of say, well, God is going to do what he's going to do, and, I suppose I just have to accept that. And the other bit that if you read that when it says God will do what he pleases and whatever he has planned and he knows where I'm going, that while that gives you a certainty in the sense that someone else is planning where you're going, it doesn't necessarily say that the plans are going to be pleasant. And that, I think that is where some of the difficulty is. But I want to read some other verses which I know that you will find, you will know them very, very, very well. And I think it's because what God is saying is through Job, I have a plan for you. And when Jeremiah speaks, he says, I've got plans to prosper you. And that message comes to a people that are in real hardship at the moment because they're in exile. And yet, when we come to the New Testament, this hope, this certainty is spoken of again and again. Jesus promises that there's homes with many rooms. And that, do not be afraid, because when I go, I will come back and take you to be with me. And all these promises of return and redemption. And Paul says this to the church at Romans, and he says, and we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose. So, even when things don't make sense, even when things seem wrong, even when hardship doesn't seem right, God is sovereign over us, as the song by Aaron Key says. He is sovereign over us and he is working for our good. Now, that is going to take a little bit of work, certainly on my part, to trust within that, to rest within that. Because in one sense it's quite easy if you look at it on a surface level, but in a deeper level it's harder to work through. But what the Bible is assuring me is that the circumstances that I find myself in life, or you find yourself in life, God will shape and mould and use to make you more like Christ and to get you to the end. And then Paul says, and you will know this, I am convinced that nothing can ever separate us from God's love. Neither death nor life, nor angels nor demons, neither our fears for today, nor our worries about tomorrow, not even the powers of hell can separate us from God's love. No power in the sky above or in the earth below, indeed nothing in all creation will ever be able to separate us from the love of God that is revealed in Christ Jesus our Lord. And so, for Dad, the worst time turned out to be the best time. For my friend, the timing didn't seem right, but the timing has come to fruition. For me that morning, I was watched over. I was kept safe. And for Job, in the midst of his terrible suffering, he affirms that he knows his Redeemer lives. And he knows that his Redeemer has plans for him, and his Redeemer will do what he wants. And I think what the New Testament adds to that is that we see God in the person of Christ. In the Old Testament we see God, but in the New Testament we see God in the person of Christ. And we see someone who has walked where we have walked, who has shared our humanity, who has been made like us in every way yet without sin, who understands the fears, the concerns, the difficulties, and yet sits at the Father's right hand as our advocate. And they look at us and they have plans to prosper us and not to harm us. They have plans to give us a hope for a future, and there is an inheritance waiting. Just want to end with a prayer, and it's a prayer that is looking at life but also asking God for help if we, in the situation that we find ourselves in. O God, I bless thee for the happy moment when I first saw thy law fulfilled in Christ. Wrath appeased, death destroyed, sin forgiven, and my soul saved. Ever since, thou hast been faithful to me. Daily have I proved the power of Jesus' blood. Daily have I known the strength of the Spirit, my teacher, director, sanctifier. I want no other rock to build upon than that I have. Desire no other hope than that of gospel truth. Need no other look than that which gazes on the cross. Forgive me if I have tried to add anything to the one foundation, if I have unconsciously relied upon my knowledge, experience, deeds, and not seen them as filthy rags. If I have attempted to complete what is perfect in Christ. May my cry be always, only Jesus, only Jesus. In him is freedom from condemnation, fullness in his righteousness, eternal vitality in his given life, indissoluble union in fellowship with him. In him I have all that I can hold. Enlarge me to take in more. If I backslide, let me like Peter weep bitterly and return to him. If I am tempted and have no wit, give me strength enough to trust in him. If I am weak, may I faint upon his bosom of eternal love. If in extremity, let me feel that he can deliver me. If driven to the verge of hope and to the pit of despair, grant me grace to fall into his arms. O God, hear me. Do for me more than I ask, think, or dream. TCF family, rest in God. He knows what he's doing. He'll see you through to the end. Your hope, your future, it's all secure. And he loves you. He loves you dearly. And he will take care of you. And he will see you through to the end. And you will spend eternity in glory with him. Love you, miss you all. Let's hope this lockdown release works and we are back as a body soon. I really want to meet again round the Lord's table. And we have taken so much for granted. And we should remember how much we yearn to be together when the doors of our church open again. Take care.